Där är jag också miljöpartist, men dock från Östergötland.
And I also know we've got a lot of representatives from trade unions here. Maybe if someone wants to introduce themselves.
Det är typiskt, alla vet att du är från Sverige.
Yeah, you're a trade guy.
I'm a trade guy. I'm not an answer. Jag tror det var Basinkomst. Jag jobbar inte på Basinkomst. Jag tror det var då jobbar väldigt mycket aktivt.
Let me say just something that I would like to declare a strong wish for your success in this strike, and this is a very important part of what is taking place. The erosion of labour standards, the erosion of wages by these various methods, and taking away things by tricking and various devices. We must fight against that, and I wish you every success in this action.
Yeah, we have a question from us.
Thank you. I'm not an economist.
That's fine.
But it seems to me like we've sort of built our welfare state on using people who sort of settle for less pay. If everybody would get the basic income like the whole world, is there a risk for inflation of that income and just, nullifying all
The answer from an economics point of view is that there would be no inflationary effect because you are substituting other forms of expenditure. So you're taking away. But in actual fact, you would also tend to have several anti-inflationary effects that are basic income. Imagine that often it's the affluent and people who are paying for luxuries and imported goods and services. If you had a basic income, you would tilt the demand for basic local community goods and services. And they, in economic terms, they have a strong elasticity of demand. What that means is that if you increase the demand for them, the supply of those goods and services increases, which stops prices from rising. So it's actually not an inflationary effect. It could be the other way round. But it would actually stimulate demand for goods and services, which use people, labour and work to provide them. So it would have what we call a multiplier effect in the local economies.
I think we have time for 2 questions more.
Then I would go for a glass of wine.
Yeah. And we will continue this discussion online, so when you get back to your computers back home, go to Facebook, you look up Basinkomst medborgarlön eller Basinkomst Göteborg, så kommer ni hitta mer information. But on for the next question, we have a gentleman up here. Yes, in the white shirt.
I can speak up. I have an American partner, so if she could get basic income pay, most of it would go to pay off healthcare debt and pay off college debt to private companies. Would you mention a few things we would have to address in our Western capitalistic society before we can get basic income and not have private institutions literally just take it away?
Yeah, I think this is, you've touched on one of the biggest issues in the precariat, because everybody in the precariat is on the edge of unsustainable debt. And the big phenomenon in the last 5 years, as we know, since the crash, is this growth of payday loans, and we have Wonga in the UK, and more than 11 million people in the United States are trapped in these ridiculously high interest debt situations where they're literally paying thousands of % on their debts. So that means they are never able to get out of that debt. It's something they're going to live with for 20, 30 years unless they win the lottery. I think we've got to curb those things. But here again, the basic income has a potentially liberating effect, which is why in the Indian case, and this is important, I think, for the Indian case, the emancipatory value of a basic income is greater than the monetary value, because it gives people some liquidity and some assurance of liquidity. And what we've seen in those Indian villages is that a whole lot of people use their basic income to pay down part of their debt and to increase their savings. So they retain debt, but they increase their savings. Why did they do that and not pay off the whole of the debt? Because it gave them liquidity, so that if they had a crisis that suddenly hit them, they would have enough money in order to face that liquidity crisis without going into a high-paying money lender. And that makes the emancipatory value of having liquidity, because you can avoid, in many cases, not always, in many cases going into high-interest debt, because when you have a crisis, you have access. And I think that emancipatory argument is something that I've not seen anywhere else other than in the argument that I've developed from the Indian experiments. But the most wonderful thing of all, and you will like this, is that it enabled a number of villagers who were in bonded labour, who were in Nauka relations in Madhya Pradesh, to buy themselves out of their debt. So they became free men, and they did it by pooling their family basic incomes. And for me, it makes me cry just to think about them. They're now free men. And they strut around because they've got their freedom. So they can bargain for wages and so on at the harvest time. And if you see that, I promise you, it makes you feel great. Because getting freedom is what it's all about. But may I just end up, because I'm looking at Neil's argument, if anybody wants a copy of the Swedish book, here's the repository of copies, if anybody's interested. Maybe one more person up as well. Oh, he's going to ask a question, is he?
So we'll have, I think we have to clear this by 9, so we'll have one last question from the lady over here, and then we can continue discussions on over here.
You said that the basic income would be about a third of the normal income. I don't know what you mean the normal income, but I earn about 20,000 Swedish krona a month, and a third of that would be less, 7,000. Something, and then I would hardly be able to pay my rent. So I would still have to work if I have this basic income. But then there is still the problem then for those people who doesn't have a work, have a job, and they then need to try to find this job as well, to be able to have an apartment or anywhere to stay, or be able to buy their food in Sweden. So there will still be that problem with getting the job.
Yeah, there are a number of answers to your question. I'll try and be brief because it's a complex question. Don't forget that a lot of people in Sweden, in the Precariat, are earning a hell of a lot less than 20,000 a month, right? And the first thing we're talking about is creating a base and then building it gradually towards something closer to the average income. That's a longer term objective. One doesn't want to frighten people too much by saying we're going for nirvana tomorrow morning. But at the same time, you've got to realize that a lot of Swedes today, compared with 25 years ago, face enormous poverty traps. The poverty trap, which means that they're having a very low benefit of some sort, right? And if they go from those low benefits into the labour market and take the sort of wage jobs that they can get, they're facing a marginal tax rate of probably over 80% in effect, because they're losing benefits and gaining a low wage job. That's no incentive. What we're saying in effect, and I argue this point in the new book as well as the old, is what we're saying is that you reduce the poverty trap effect. You say, yeah, we're going to give you a basic amount. It's not entirely enough for you to live on, but it will help. And by the way, now it will pay you to take a low-wage job. Because you will not face that poverty trap situation. You will face the standard rate of tax that a middle class person might pay. Not much more, as is the case at the moment. Now, in most countries in Europe, people in the precariat, if they go from unemployment into low-wage jobs, in Germany, they face a marginal tax rate of 84%, whereas the middle class is paying 40%. So you have an incredibly regressive system which makes no sense in terms of encouraging work, giving incentives, and no sense equitably, obviously, right? Now, I think we have to realize that the way our welfare system has evolved not only creates poverty traps, but creates what I call in the books deep precarity traps. And there are a number of precarity traps that are very important. The term is not being used by anybody else, but I'm sure a lot of people will understand the phenomenon. One precarity trap is this. If you're in a very low wage job, not paying 20,000, but paying, say, 3,000, and you lose that job, you then have to apply for benefits. You think you get it the next morning? Huh? In the post, tomorrow morning. You have to queue, you have to apply, you have to fill in forms, you have to answer rude questions, you have to prove that those slippers under your bed are not a man's slippers who's sleeping with you and keeping you. You have to prove it again, you have to go back, you have to be polite. And it turns out that millions of people have to wait for months before they get access to benefits. Meanwhile, they've gone into debt, they've lost their apartment, their child is sick, or whatever is the case. And then along comes your employment officer saying you've got to take a job to the other side of Gothenburg, which is paying very low wage, and it's only a short-term job, and blah, 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 blah. And you'd be a fool to take it. Because not only would you face the poverty trap situation where you have a high tax rate, you lose your benefit high tax, but you have the prospect that 3 weeks later you would lose it and you'd be back in the queue to have to do all that again. And prove extra things, like you didn't lose your job by misbehaving. So you would actually have precarity. There are another type of precarity traps, which is it turns out that if anybody's educated applying for jobs, you know very well, and you should know very well, and I discuss a lot of examples, if you are a qualified person as an engineer, a chemist, an economist, whatever, and you take a low-paying job outside your occupation, right, because you can't get a job in your career, you actually lower the prospect of getting into a job in your occupation. So you face a prospect, and if I take a cheap, low-level job, you actually lower your probability of getting a good job later. Now that is a terrible situation, and I give some examples, ridiculous situations, where that has happened. One person was fully qualified for a job, and he got so angry, he demanded from the Human Resources Department of this big corporation, why didn't he get the job? Nobody got the job. Why didn't he get the job? He was qualified? And they said, yes, but your last job was not at the same time. So then we ruled you out. Yeah, well, it's just, but that's what's happening. That's a precarity trap. So you tell people they must take jobs, but actually they would be irrational in those circumstances, and that is becoming more common because more and more online CVs and application procedures go through these crazy processes where they exclude people if they've been doing the wrong thing. So we're in a mess. We're in a mess. Basic income starts solving a lot of it. Yeah, Will, thank you very much.
And on that note, we're in a mess, but basic income can solve some of these things. I would like to encourage you to read this book. It's the Precariat Charter. It will be out in Swedish later this autumn, right?
November.
Oh. And we also have the
some copies
earlier book available in Swedish, Prekariatet. And also from us, the organizers, you can look us up on Basinkomst.nu och på Facebook på Basinkomst Göteborg. and Guy, I want to thank you very much for making the trip to Sweden and coming. We have the most Swedish things for you.
Ah, very good. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Great.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.